When white people first arrived in Victoria, this is probably a little bit like what they would have seen. I wonder whether a willy wagtail would have been watching them as they slowly rowed up the Melbourne River. They were looking for fresh water and maybe some green grass where they could bring sheep to graze. But it was disappointing. There were a lot of these big black rocks around and a lot of salty, saline looking shrubs. Very muddy and marshy. Getting out of the whaleboat and going ashore, the rocky appearance of the places again disheartened them. Next day, Evans and some others resolved to follow up the other stream, that is the Yarra, which made a junction with the saltwater river. We call it the Melbourne. After rowing a few miles between the mangrove banks, they sighted the beautiful rises of Melbourne, Batman's Hill and Emerald Hill. This old map shows the original course of the Yarra. You can see it diverts to the east from the Melbourne River. The going was really difficult. The creek was totally overgrown. Mary Gardner, who was rowed up the river in about 1837, described a grotesque archway overhead and reeds 7 feet high. The banks seemed impenetrable, and it was also overgrown with mangroves. Eventually, though, they came to a little waterfall at about the place at the bottom of where King Street now is. This, above the waterfall, was fresh water, which was the very thing they'd come looking for. Batman decided to establish his small farm on a hill to the left of that waterfall, on the northern bank. This is the view from Batman's Hill, from a painting of the time, and you can see looking west a blue lake, which in those days was full of water birds. But also notice the flat land to the west. Batman's Hill was flattened eventually for Southern Cross Station. Just south of the waterfall was Emerald Hill. They called it Emerald Hill because green grass grew there prolifically as compared to the waterlogged swampy areas all round. South Melbourne Town Hall now sits on top of this ancient volcanic vent, unknown to most Melbourne people. And volcanic vents are actually a big part of Victoria's geology. We have one of the largest lava plains on Earth, and in fact it's still active. And it's this lava plain, this lava, which flowed down from the north of Melbourne into the CBD, what we call the CBD now. Port Phillip Bay and the plains that Batman was looking at is in actual fact a sunk land and is still slowly sinking compared to the 3 surrounding areas bounded by the old fault lines, the Rowsley Fault, the Selwyn Fault. And 10,000 years ago, the coastline looked a little more like this. Bass Strait would have been just another hunting ground for the local Aboriginal people. Eventually, the ice, which was in fact about 2 kilometres thicker than New York, slowly melted and the sea came back in again, so that now we see the ancient lava flows. Well, they're not ancient, they're new lava flows geologically speaking, run into the sea on the western side of Melbourne. Very common sight. These lava flows on low-lying land haven't been as attractive a place to build on as compared to the eastern well-watered suburbs. The soils are thin and very saline still in places, but that leaves a few special places for us where biodiversity continues and flourishes. The lava would have looked a little like this as it flowed down and took over all of the ancient rivers and hills and valleys. And the creeks that resulted had to still work their way down to the sea. The Merri Creek here, for instance, had to run around this basalt ridge and has been doing so for maybe 15,000 years. This is an interesting place because it shows the western side of Merri Creek to be totally solid basalt, and yet the eastern side is on sandstone. The land flow is entirely different. It absorbs water, and at this point the water runs out of the sandstone and becomes a native well. This place in Northcote is an important place and was used by Aboriginal people for thousands of years as a campsite. But to us it's just the beginnings of the leafy eastern suburbs and the gentle undulating hills that we're familiar with. Batman made his treaty here with the Aboriginal people. We think it was at this place. For a few trinkets he managed to buy an entire western part of Melbourne, which he had his eyes on. This area grows very few trees and looked like a sweeping grassland in his eyes, but in actual fact the soils are not very deep. They are volcanic, but water here is difficult to find. In this same area is Mount Cottrell, here I've circled in yellow. It's 20 kilometres or so from Melbourne. And in actual fact, it's probably a major massacre site of early Melbourne. We drive past it these days on the way to Geelong, on the way to Ballarat. And this is a little clip from an old newspaper of the actual event. Mount Cottrell these days just looks like a little pimple on a flat plain, a few lava rocks or basalt rocks high up. But looking down, you can see the city of Melbourne across the plains which once held swaying kangaroo grass, green and lush in Batman's eyes. And it's the reason why settlers came here. And I wonder whether a willy wagtail that we sometimes see on the banks, on the shores of Port Phillip Bay, on these black rocks still, could tell us an amazing story if only he could speak.